Welcome to the ultimate Next.js Crash Course. In this specific crash course, you will learn everything that you need to know to master Next.js from basics to advanced concept in a full stack, modern, production-ready application. You will learn things like client and server components, server actions, complex database manipulations using Supabase, styling with TailwindCSS, TypeScript Form Validations using Zod, different data fetching mechanisms, and knowing when to pick the right one for your project and for your page, building a SEO-friendly site that the search engines are going to love, and a lot more that we will be covering in this specific course. But here's the thing, don't worry if any of these terms are alien to you, because my teaching style is to teach you all about the decisions that we are making, such as the whys, the hows, and the whats in this specific course. Towards the end of this course, you will be able to confidently build applications that scale really well and are really performant. If you have been looking to master Next.js but are tired of staring at the docs and are tired of building a bunch of to-do applications, then this course will teach you Next.js in a comprehensive, easy to follow, and a well-organized manner. And guess what? You don't necessarily need any prior knowledge of Next.js before taking this course, because whatever I teach, I'm going to walk you through each concept step by step, so you will know how I got that information and how you can apply the same in your projects as well. Now, here's the thing, unlike other courses, we won't be building a dummy application. We will be building a full stack e-commerce application that allows you to sell different products. So trust me, if you follow along, you will master Next.js and you will be able to build full stack production ready applications. So what are we waiting for? Let's get started. Now, whenever you're ready to level up your Next.js skills, I have some good news. I'm running a exclusive hands-on workshop for you to take your Next.js knowledge to the next level. It will teach you everything that you need to know to design, build, and deploy a full stack app with Next.js. It is a live workshop, so you will get direct access to me and I will answer any questions that you may have as well. Plus, at the same time, you will get lots of exercises to learn different topics in Next.js. You will be divided into breakout rooms so you can learn from your workshop peers as well and learn complex topics together. And if you get stuck, don't worry, because I'm there to help guide you as well. Additionally, you can show off your certificate of completion at your workplace or on LinkedIn to showcase that are a certified Next.js developer. At the same time, I will be sharing a lot that I couldn't necessarily share in this specific crash course in that workshop. So if you're interested, please sign up to the waitlist, as the waitlist folks get exclusive launch discounts and special bonuses as well. So sign up to the waitlist and I will see you in the workshop. What is Next.js? Next.js is a React framework for production. It allows you to rapidly build modern full stack applications. It is one of the most popular React frameworks out there. And you want to know what makes Next.js powerful? Well, it does provide a lot out of the box, so as a developer, you can focus on writing code and building seamless experiences for your users. For example, if we take a look at the docs, it provides us a lot out of the box. It uses a file-based routing system, so all you need to do is create a new file and your route will be automatically created for you. You can opt in to different data fetching mechanisms based on your page and the requirement of your page. So for example, if you want your page to be server-side rendered, then you can do that, or if you want your page to be completely static, then you can do that as well thanks to Next.js. It also has additional capabilities of server actions and mutations, which I'm really excited to teach you in this specific course as well. At the same time, we have different rendering techniques, so it allows you to create hybrid web applications where your code can be rendered either on the server or on the client thanks to server and React components, which currently are only available inside of Next.js. So we will be learning all of that too. It also has a really powerful router that performs a lot of the caching for you, so your router is going to take care of a lot for you, because a lot of your data will be cached and you can opt out of caching as needed. Then we can choose how you want to style our application using CSS module, TailwindCSS, and a few other different options. Then we can also optimize our application thanks to Next.js, because it does provide us a lot of built-in optimizations provided you use the components that Next.js provides you, so that you can improve your core web vitals that a lot of search engines focus on to rank your application higher. For example, if you use the image component inside of Next.js, then it automatically automatically optimizes all the images for you. So based on your viewport, it is going to download a different image size so that your application is really fast. Then it also provides you a powerful metadata API so that you can power your application for search engine optimization as well. You can also test your application and configure your application so that as your application scales, Next.js can help you with that as well. So Next.js does give you a lot out of the box, and that is why it is one of the most popular frameworks for React out there. So I'm really excited to teach you all about Next.js in this specific course. Now, if you are interested in accessing all the visuals and links that I have shared in this specific crash course, then check the link in the description below, because I have compiled all of them and shared it with you, so you will be able to easily follow along. So check the link in the description below and download it. Let's go ahead and install our first Next.js application. Now, if we head over to the docs, then we can head over to the installation section and get our Next.js app up and running. Now here we will have a few things we want to make sure. We want to make sure that you meet these system requirements. So you want to make sure that you have this Node.js version or later, and you can quickly go to the command line and just type node-v, and that will automatically tell you the node version. Now in my case, I'm already on this specific version, so I'm pretty much good to go. Now you also want to make sure that you're using any of these operating systems as well. So make sure you have that. Since I'm on Mac, I'm pretty much good to go there as well. Now here, they recommend using a tool called as Create Next App, which is an easy way to bootstrap your Next.js application. It is a CLI tool. Now what it will do is it will create a new Next.js app for you with a lot of the setup for you, and using the command like npx will also give you a few prompts that you can follow and set up your application. So let's just go ahead and copy this, head over to the terminal and paste what we just copied. Here let's just call this app Easy Cell. We will be using TypeScript, we will be using ESLint, and we will be using a CSS framework called as Tailwind. So alongside building Next.js and learning Next.js, you will also be learning TailwindCSS, which is a added bonus. So now we're gonna say yes there. We don't want to configure a source directory, and we will be using app router. Now if you head over to the documentation, you will notice that we have the app router and the pages router. Now in Next.js, the recommended way is actually using an app router. We will be sticking to that. So now heading back here, we are going to say yes, we are going to use the app router, and we don't want to customize the default import alias as well. So let's just say no to that. Now it's going to install the dependencies, and the dev dependencies necessary to run Next.js application and get started. So now that it's almost ready to go, we can just go ahead and change directory to Easy Cell. Let's just go ahead and open up our repo, our Next.js project inside Visual Studio Code. Now I am using VS Code, which is Visual Studio Code, as an editor of my choice, but feel free to use whatever you're comfortable with. Now we already have the app ready to go, but if you head over to package.json, you can see this specific command, which is nextdev, which will start our development server. So let's just go ahead to our terminal and run npm run dev and see what this app is all about. Now I'm on localhost 3001, and that's because I already have app that we want to build, Easy Cell, on localhost 3000 running. But you will most likely have localhost 3000 here, but don't worry about that, it's just a port. So let's just go ahead and click on this, and our app is ready to go. We have created our first Next.js application, so congratulations for that. So now that we have our app set up, let's just go ahead and start building Easy Cell. Let's give you a quick walkthrough of the app that we are building. So for example, if we head over to VS Code, then here you can see all the files and folders created for us. So now if you head over to the app directory, this is our app router. This is the root directory of our application, and where we will be creating any of the files. So now whatever you see on the page here, for example, this Next.js page, this is all available inside of page.tsx, because page.tsx is the default route inside of our app directory. Now the entire application is also surrounded by another file called as layout.tsx. You can see the HTML and body elements here inside of our application, and that's pretty neat as well, because this means any of the code inside of page or any of the new pages that we create will be inside layout. So this children here is what will contain all those routes, and this specific layout will surround the entire application. So then we have the global.css file. This file is our global configuration file, and we already have TailwindCSS already set up, which is pretty awesome. And we have some default styling as well. At the same time, speaking of Tailwind, we have another Tailwind config file where we will be adding or extending the existing Tailwind config that is provided out of the box for us. We can extend the design system that Tailwind provides us over here. Now, also have a public folder that where we can store all our assets, and it will be publicly accessible, such as it gives us the next.svg and vercel.svg. Then lastly, we also have the package.json, which have a bunch of scripts ready for us, such as we already saw the next dev script allowed us to start a development server. This will allow us to build the application for production, and we can use the next start script to start the application that was built inside of next build. Then this is just allows us to lint our application to check for any potential errors that have come up and help us avoid any sort of mistakes. So let's talk about routing now. Now, routing is one of the most fundamental concept inside of Next.js, but it's also relatively straightforward. For example, if you want to define a route inside of Next.js, then all you need to do is create a file called as page.tsx. Now, any file which is page.tsx will be the index file in that specific folder. Now, in this case, the app folder, page.tsx is the default route because it's called page.tsx. The word page is sort of reserved for that reason. Now, whenever you want to create a new route, you can just create a new page.tsx file. Now, let's say we want to create a route called as products. And in that case, we could just say products and then create a new file inside of that called as page.tsx. And we can create a new page here and just call this hi page. Now, what would happen is when you go to that application, if you go to /products, then hi page should be displayed here because we have just defined that here. We have defined page.tsx here, and this becomes the default route. As we build our application further, we will get into more routes. And the reason why we can just create a new file inside of Next.js, inside a folder, and we can automatically route to it. And that's because Next.js uses a file-based routing system. So whenever you create a new file, it should mean something. And as long as you stick to the definition of that file, and you would be able to get a lot of the properties for that specific file. Now, there are quite a few special files inside of Next.js. There are special file conventions needed to define the special files, and they will create a specific UI for you. For example, the file that we already have is the layout.tsx file. Now, as we discussed earlier a bit, this file contains the HTML and body tags, and all the pages inside of our application will have whatever we define here, because layout is the root file. So layout is essentially a shared UI between multiple routes. Layouts preserve state, remain interactive, and they do not re-render. It's really important. Now, the children prop means that any page that we load will automatically be loaded with inside the children prop. And this specific layout is called a root layout because it's a root file inside the app directory, which is our main directory. So anytime we want to define something globally, then we would use that. Now, I have created a few diagrams for us for all these special files inside of Next.js. Now, let's say we have a header and we have a footer. Now, this header and footer would be there in all the pages. So, for example, if you head over to EasySelf site, we have header and footer whenever we go to an individual page, whenever we go to the upload page, and so on. So, we need to add header and footer inside of layouts. We want that header and footer to exist everywhere. So, that is the advantage of adding a root layout. Layout file is not just limited to that. You could create a new layout file here inside of products and create something similar to this. It needs to take in a children prop. So we can just copy this and paste it here. Again, we don't need to add HTML and body tags because that's only for the root layout. This is not a root layout, but we could just get in whatever children we have as well. Now, this specific layout file will only be applicable to products. It will not be applicable anywhere else. So let's just try this. Let's say hi product here, and whatever children gets defined inside of products will be the children here. So now, for example, if we go to our site, since we are on the product routes, we are seeing hi page. We should not see hi page the minute we route to the home page. There you go. It's gone. So that is the advantage of layout. We can define layouts however we like. Now, as we build our application further, we will be learning all these special files along the way, but routing is extremely crucial for us to learn. Now, the second file, now as we build our application further, we will be going through the other special files as well. We have defined define layout and page files here, I wanted to start the routing fundamentals here so you can start learning Next.js. Before we proceed further, let's just delete what we created because this was just to learn Next.js. Now, as we saw earlier, the app router comes with TailwindCSS as a CSS framework by default, as we chose while setting up our project. So let me quickly give you a walkthrough of TailwindCSS so you know exactly how to style our application, and we'll be able to follow along as I teach you Next.js as well. So for example here, TailwindCSS is essentially a utility-first CSS framework. Now, if you want to learn Tailwind in depth, then I also have a free crash course for you on TailwindCSS that you should also check out on my channel right here. If you want to learn in depth, then definitely check out the Tailwind crash course on my channel. Now, Tailwind is a utility-first CSS framework. So for example, instead of typing display flex in a CSS file, all you're going to do is write flex. Instead of writing padding top is 4 pixel or 16 pixel or 1 rem or 2 rem or so on, you are going to write pt-4. So that is the beauty of Tailwind. These are all different utilities. Now you can think of these utilities as essentially JavaScript functions that return the specific CSS for us, for example. Essentially, that's what they are. Now, the reason why Tailwind has gained so much popularity, because you don't need to create a separate file altogether. You can just inline the CSS here. For example, if you hover over this, then you have display flex here. Now, if you want to install the specific plugin that I do have, then you can go to extensions in Visual Studio Code and then look for Tailwind CSS IntelliSense, and you will be able to get the IntelliSense needed to style your application. So if you head to getting started, you can see the utility first fundamentals here and why they're important. But if we take a look at responsive design, then Tailwind does provide us a breakpoint prefix as well so that we can style our application for different viewports. So for example, by default, Tailwind focuses on mobile and then we go to desktop. For example, over here, P24 applies to all viewports. But if I'll specifically say I want P24 to apply to mobile, but let's say I want P64 to apply to, let's say, desktop, then I can just add large as a prefix. Tailwind also provides us with a design system out of the box. So it gives us a bunch of colors already, all these different swatches that we can just use. So for example, if I want to change the background color of the page to BG, I don't know, gray 800, then I could easily do that thanks to Tailwind. But at the same time, I can change this to pink as well if I want, but it provides us on a scale from 50 to 900 or 950. These are all the different colors that Tailwind provides us, and it goes all the way to 950. Now, it also provides us a spacing scale. If you want to learn anything about getting good at building really good design, then you need to make sure that you have a really good spacing scale. Now, we don't need to worry about it because Tailwind automatically provides us for us, which is this default spacing scale. For example, if you use px4, then it means it's 16 pixel or 1 rem and so on. So as you saw over here, P24 is adding a padding of 6 rem here. But if I say px, then it will only add padding left and padding right. And if I want only on the y-axis, then I can just say py. So all these utilities are really cool and really great. And you will learn more Tailwind as we build our application further. But keep this in mind that I will be focusing mainly on Next.js and providing you all the Tailwind styles so you know exactly how they work. But I won't be necessarily going in depth in Tailwind. In order for us to match the look and feel of the application that is easy sell that we want to build, it has a overall theme. Now, although this is not a design course, but in order for you to build a really good looking application, a beautiful application, and in that case, you need to come up with good fonts, good colors, good spacing scale, which a lot of it Tailwind provides us. But what we are going to do now is set up our project in a way that we are set up for success. So we will configure our Tailwind config file, which is our global configuration file for our application. And we will also add a couple of components that will set up our application as well, which is the header component here, which has the easy sell logo along with the upload link. At the same time, we will also have a footer, which also just has your company trademark, for example. This can be anything you want. So let's go ahead and do that. So now first, let's just get rid of the stuff that we don't want. Let's just remove all all of this because we don't really want it. We are going to start from scratch. Here, all we need is min 8 screen. Let's get rid of all of this. Let's just make sure everything is centered. And we're going to set the max width to be 100 rand. Next thing we're going to do is go to Tailwind config file. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of this extend background image because we don't need it. We're going to replace theme with these colors. Remember I said that Tailwind does have a few colors, for example, that it comes out of the box with. So if you want to extend the existing color, so for example, gray goes all the way to 950, then we can start adding custom colors at 951, 952, and so on. Next, let's go ahead and create a new folder called as components. Now this components folder will store all our React components here. So let's create a header component and let's also create a footer component. Now again, for the header component, let's go ahead and create a new functional component and call this header. Now in the header component, we are going to have a couple of things. We're going to have a easy cell logo, and you feel free to call this whatever you want. And we are also going to have a upload link. As we can see right here, we have the easy cell logo as well as the upload link. So now what we want is whenever anyone clicks on the logo, we want this to be a link. So it links between application. And for that, we could use an A tag, which is very typical. We can just say that route to the main page, for example. Similarly, this will also be in another A tag and then route to, let's say, product/upload. But this page doesn't exist yet, but it will eventually. So let's just route to it. But we don't need to do that in Next.js. In Next.js, there is a component, if you go to the documentation, which is called the link component. It extends the HTML anchor element to provide prefetching and client-side navigation. So for example, if you want to add linking between pages, for example, and these pages exist inside of your Next.js application, then you can easily just use the link component. If let's say you want to link to an external page altogether, then you're not going to get any advantages of the link component because every time this specific link component is on the page, it's going to prefetch that data automatically so that we can have that data and user can get a seamless user experience. So what we could do is we could just copy the import here. And we don't need React inside of Next.js because React is globally available. So we don't need to import it. But here, instead of A tag, we're just going to call this link, close this with link. Similarly, since product upload is the same as well, then we're going to call this link too. We'll dive into the link component a bit later as well. The best place for us to declare the header component is inside layout. So what we could do is right above children, we're going to say, because layout is a file that wraps the entire application. Now we have imported the header. And here you can see easy cell and upload. Now if you click on upload, this page doesn't exist, but it does route us to it. And if you click on easy cell again, it goes back to home page, which is exactly what we want. So this is how the header component would be. So now I already have the header component styling for us. So what we could do is just replace that specific style. Code for this is already available in the GitHub repo. So definitely check that out and copy paste the code as necessary. Now we will talk about this a bit later where we are taking in a font as a prop so we can pass in custom font as well in the future. But this is very simple code that takes in the font and applies it to the h1 tag. Now you can see already easy cell and upload links are already here, which is awesome. Now let's go ahead and add a footer as well. Again, we're going to copy paste it. I have provided it for you, but all it does is it wraps with the footer HTML tag and it has some styling. It's aligned to the left. And this is the name of my company, but you can call this whatever you want. Now again, footer is also going to be over here. So now let's just import footer and save it. Now again, as you saw, that font is missing inside of footer and header for now. So let's just make font optional so that we can add it later on as we configure fonts. Now, if we refresh the page, you can see we have the header and we also have a footer, which is exactly what we want. Similarly, we also have the colors as well. Now, there's one more thing that we need to do. We also need to configure our global CSS file. Now, a global CSS file is essentially a file where you would add in whatever you want to add that needs to be applied globally. And we're going to replace this entire file and pass in the styles that I have already provided for us. So for example, I have already styled h1, button, input, text area, header, and so on. So we can just use this. Now, one thing you need to keep in mind is whenever you want to extend and replace and apply styles directly to these elements, there's h1, button, then you need to use the layer attribute inside of Tailwind Tailwind and extend the base. But let's say you want to create a Tailwind component, then you can just do layer components here and then create a new component altogether if you want. Again, we won't be diving into that, but base is what we would need in this specific case. Now, if you go back to our application, look at that. We actually have our application looking very similar to what we want to build here, which is pretty amazing. So what exactly is a link component? Well, link is a React component that extends the HTML anchored element. Now, we use the A tag usually to link between pages or external pages. But the link component, I should say, is specifically for internal route. For example, inside of your application, if you are the one who has created that route, you own the page, it's an internal route, then you can use the link component. But let's say you want to route to twitter.com, for example, then you don't need to use link component because it just doesn't make any sense, because link component is a special Next.js component that provides us with a few properties that we will take a look at. For example, it provides us with prefetching. Now, what exactly is prefetching? Well, prefetching is a way to preload a route in the background before the user visits it. So routes are fetched automatically in the background as they become visible to the user. So for example, over here, right now we are only seeing these specific routes, but as we scroll down, Next.js is going to prefetch these other card elements as well, and the data for that, so that it's available as the user sees it. But on a smaller viewport, let's say we go to a mobile device, for example, over here, then in that case, we are not going to see all the 10 cards that we have on the desktop. We're only going to see one at a time. In that case, link component is very powerful because one, on a mobile device, we don't have a lot of bandwidth. We don't have a lot of data, mobile data for us. So this makes it really handy and useful because link component is only going to prefetch things that are available inside the viewport as the user is about to scroll. And now in our case, we are building the header and the upload link. So for now, we don't need to worry about it. But for eventually, as we build the card component, we will be using link component to link between pages, and that will make it really interesting for us, and we can take advantage of the performance benefits that link provides us. Now, one more quick change we want to also make is the background color here. In the easy cell, we have a specific background color, but here it's basically white. So in order for us to make sure that whenever we get the same background color, even when we route in our application, you want to change it in a spot that is global. And what we can do then is, if we go to layout.tsx file, here we could wrap children with a div tag, and this will have the background color because layout surrounds each and every page. This is a perfect spot for it. So here let's just add class name, and we can say BG Gray 951, and we can just also add some padding as well. So now you can see we also got the same color as we have over here. So let's talk about what exactly server and client components are. Well, your client components are basically React components that we are familiar with. They are your typical React components without having any specific server functionality. You can write code and it gets essentially rendered on the client, that is your browser. But with server components, the difference being that they allow you to render and cache the components on the server versus on the browser. So the server is doing the heavy lifting. So let's take a look at a diagram here. Now, typically client components are essentially your typical React component. So what essentially happens is, let's say this is your app with a header and footer and some content on the page, and the client, which is your browser, is basically asking for data from the server. The server is going to take the data and give it back to you, and it could be JSON data or any other data, and the server is going to go back, give it back to you. This is how it works right now. But things are a little different in server components. In server components, what essentially happens is the browser, which is a client, is basically requesting for that specific page or data, right? It's trying to fetch data from the server. Server components are going to render the components that say header and footer components on the server itself, and only return a specific stream, which is not JSON, but a very special stream to the client, and the browser is going to just show it onto the page. That's exactly how server components work. The main heavy lifting happens on the server versus on the client, as we saw in the client components. Now, because the browser in the client components is doing all the heavy lifting on a slow data network, the data is going to be slow and users will not be able to essentially interact with it. But versus on the server components, because our servers are typically really fast, rendering the data and components on the server is quite fast, and it returns a specific stream that the browser essentially displays onto the page. And that's essentially the difference between server and client components. But you might be wondering, well, what's what's the advantage of server components? There are a few advantages. For example, in the server component now, because the client components, that is a header and footer, now have access to the server, we can make any database calls in the server itself. So let's say in the header component, we want to fetch some data from the database. We don't need to make an additional API request. We can just call that data in the server components itself. Versus in the client components, if you want to do that, let's say in typical React application without Next.js or without the server components capabilities, we would need to make an API request. We are going to basically make an API request right here. The browser is going to make that API request, and then it's going to lead to an unnecessary network round trip. Versus on the server side, the server already has access to the components, to the data. So all we need to do is just return the stream to the browser, and all of that can be here. You don't need to make an additional API call. So you don't need to do that additional work, and it's going to save you time eventually. Now, the pros of server components are that you don't need to add an additional API call. So you can add all your code in the component itself. You can call backend in the same component, like I mentioned, and your client bundle is going to be really small because server is going to do all the heavy lifting. So because of that, your client bundle is going to be a lot smaller. And as a result, you're going to get a performance boost as well. So that is the advantage of server and client component. Now, I have written a blog post on this topic as well that you may want to check out and really understand the differences between them. But there are a few things you need to definitely keep in mind and a few gotchas that we will take a look at later. But this is the difference between a server and a client component. Now, in order for us to truly understand server and client components, let's take a look at one specific example. Now, here in the example, I already had a header and footer. Now, in Next.js, any component or page by default is essentially going to be a server component. So this means it's going to be rendered and fetched on the server, and the browser is just going to show the stream onto the page. Now, in this example, header and footer in our Easy Sell app, header and footer are already created, and they both are not client components. They both are server components. So this means if we head over to the app and refresh the page, now if we go to inspect element, go to sources, in Webpack internal, I want to show something really cool. Now if you go to the folder app, you will not see, even in shared, you will not see header and footer at all because they are not client components. So browser has no business to show them in here in the client bundle, but because they are rendered on the server. But if we make them client component, all we need to do is add a directive here called use client. Save this. Same thing here. Let's add this additional directive use client. Now this will use client makes this specific footer component a client component. Same thing for header as well. We are explicitly telling Next.js that, hey, the browser is going to be responsible for it, just like our usual React applications do. So let's head over to a page, refresh it. And now if we head over to Webpack internal, let's see what Webpack has built for us. And if we go to components now, you can see now footer and header are in fact included in the client side bundle. This is the bundle of the browser, that's our client. So these two components are now included because now it's browser's job to fetch and render them and not the server. And just like that, you know the difference between server and client components and how making a lot of our components, server components, makes so much more sense. If we review our application again, just like that, we know now that layout, page, footer, header are all server components. Now let's just get rid of use client for now, and this also makes it a server component. Now, when should components be client components? Well, let's take a look at some examples. Now, whenever your components need any interactivity, that is, they need the browser. The server won't have access to the window object. They won't have access to use effect, use client, or any of the React lifecycle methods. Then in that case, those components need to be a client component. So for example, if you have event listeners, if you want to provide immediate feedback to the user and update the UI, show some sort of a loading state and so on, then in that case, you would need to use a client component. If you want to use browser location, if you want to use local storage, all of these things are available strictly in the browser and not on the server, then in that case, you want to make those components a client component. If you take a look at our components, that is header and footer, do we think they need to be client components? Because there's nothing here that makes it a client component. It can be rendered and fetched on the server. Similarly for header, yes, we we are linking from one page to the other, but that does not mean that this cannot be fetched or rendered on the server. They do not use any lifecycle hooks. They don't have any browser specific stuff such as local storage or window or anything like that. And in that case, header can also be a server component. Now, if we take a look at page as well is a server component. But every time you create a new component or a new page inside of Next.js, when you're using the app router, you need to keep in mind that you need to ask yourself, should this need a browser or not? Can this be done on the server? Because by default, it will be a server component. So we can safely keep header and footer as server components, same as page for now because there's nothing in page right now. But eventually, as we add more code and build our application further, then in that case, we can decide if certain things should be a client component or a server component. So for example, in this counter example, this definitely needs to be a client component because it's using useState. But let's say we don't need to use useState, we don't need to use useEffect or so on, then in that case, it can be a server component. So in terms of composition patterns, this is a really good table for that. What do you need to do? You want to fetch data? Make it a server component. Access backend resources? Make it a server component, not a client component. Keep sensitive information on the server, such as access tokens, APIs keys, server component. Keeping large dependencies on the server. So let's say you're using a really heavy library, then in that case, those can be rendered on the server, then we can do that on the server. Adding interactivity and event listeners, such as on-click handlers, on-change handlers, then they definitely need to be a client component. Same thing for any of the use state and lifecycle effects, client component, browser-only APIs, client component, custom hooks that depend on state effects, browser-only APIs, client components, or even React class components, then client components as well. This diagram is a really good handy reference to keep in mind whenever you are adding a new component or page in your application. Now in EasyCell, so far we have a header and we have a footer, but we don't have any of this. Now majority of this page has card components. So if we take a look at our diagram that I've created for us to talk a little bit more about the architecture, we have the header, we then have the footer as well. So we can add a footer here at the bottom, for example, and let's just call this footer. And now we have all these different cards on the page. And these can safely be called as card components. They have a name, description, image, and also a price. And similarly, if you create this one card component, then you can use it pretty much in both sections. For example, you can use it in top products as well as you can use that in all products. How about we go ahead and create this card component? Now, the real question is, should this component be a server component or a client component? Well, let's think about it. Do we need any sort of use effect or use state or any React lifecycle hooks? Well, not really, because all we need to do is when the user clicks on this specific component, this card, then we want to navigate to product / this unique ID. Similarly, we will be fetching this eventually from the server. So this can safely be a server component. So for now, let's keep this a server component and then revisit this later. So what we can do is let's create a new file called as card.tsx. Now here again, we don't need to add the use client directive because this is a server component, and we can safely make it a card component. Now, if we just say card, but on the pager, we can just say, let's render the card component. All right. So now if we go here, you can see card did get displayed here, which is awesome. Now, we do need some sort of data to render on the cards. So what we could do is create an array of different items and then render it onto the page and render these cards. So for that, let's create a array of products here. So let's just call these products, and they are going to be an array of objects. So we can call this ID 0. Name is going to be mushroom orange lamp. Description is going to be, let's just call this mushroom orange lamp itself, and let's just add description here. And then we can say price is gonna be $40. And we need some sort of an image URL as well. Already have an image URL for us, so let's just save that. We can just pretty much loop through that. So we can say products.map, and let's just call this product, and we can just loop through this list of products. Now we don't need to do this. We can just call this card and close it immediately. And now every card component needs a key property. So we just pass in key. It's gonna be product.name with an ID as well, which is again which can come from product.id. You can see how the structure of the card component would be. We have all these different properties. So now in the card component, we need a few things. I'm going to provide the structure for us. So let's just get rid of this. And and save it here. Now the card component has a few different property, right? We have ID, name, description, price, and image URL, which is exactly what we have here. ID, name, description, price, and image URL. We're not passing any of the data to card. We are passing key for sure, but other than that, we're not passing anything. So let's just spread all the properties here in card component. Now, as we do that, we should be able to see a card component, which is exactly what we want. We don't have an image yet, but we'll fix that in a second. But we do have the styling necessary for us. We have the name of the product, and we also have a description with a price as well. Let's quickly walk you through the code as well. Now this card component takes in these specific props, and we are passing all those props here. We are setting the max width to be 32 rem, so it doesn't exceed a specific width. That's going to be the max width of the card component. But at the same time, we are saying that, hey, it's going to be flex, and it's going to be flex column, so that this is where the image would go. So we can add this here, image URL. Now we will learn image using the Next.js image component just in a second, but let me quickly walk you through the rest of the code as well. Now we have name and we have description here, and similarly at the bottom we have price here. Now Tailwind has these text utilities apply a combination of CSS styles such as font size and line height if you use text-to-Excel. Now here's the thing, Tailwind also provides a few utilities which makes Tailwind really awesome, which is line uppercase, line clamp 2, and there's one more, truncate. Now these ones are really handy, so you don't have to add these styling on your own, and you can just use these utilities yourself. So if we take a look at line clamp 2, after a specific number of lines, it's basically going to truncate a block of text. That's what line clamp 2 does. And we also have uppercase utility, which again, if we go to text transform, uppercase will turn the text into uppercase, all uppercase. But similarly, you have other case as well, such as normal case, lowercase, capitalize, and so on, which is again very handy. And lastly, we have truncate. If you use truncate here, then if the text overflows, instead of wrapping it to the next line and making the card component really huge, we are essentially using an ellipses here. So truncate does exactly that. For example, if we go here and just copy the same description here and make it really long, but we are good here because it's not going to overflow and it's going to show this ellipses here, which is pretty awesome. So that's exactly how our card component is essentially set up. Now to show the power of the image component, let's go ahead and head over to the network tab. Now if we head to the network tab, you should be able to see any of the requests that have been made. So now if I refresh the page, now you can see all the images that got downloaded, for example. So these are all the images. Now we have this image of 81.9 kilobytes, which is a Jeep image. Similarly, let's also take a look at one more image, which is this lamb. So it was 61 and Jeep was 81. 61 and 81. Now I'm going to open up the responsive site, for example, which emulates the mobile device. So now if we take a look at the Jeep, it's 75 kilobytes and the mushroom image is in fact 25 kilobytes. And if you remember, it was like 61, 81 or something like that. That's the power of image component. On different viewports, Next.js image component is going to detect what viewport you are on, whether you're on desktop or mobile or what type of device. And accordingly, it's going to download a smaller image or a bigger image so that the quality doesn't get compromised. It doesn't cost you performance to download a huge image. And that is one of the beauties of Next.js image component. So if you use the image component in an app which is quite image heavy, for example, if Amazon were to use Next.js, then this specific image component, having it to be a different size on different devices is honestly a game changer, because the Amazon app is going to be really fast. So a lot of apps do care for that first load because the users don't want to wait around, and images can really slow down. Because if you think about it, a lot of our web is full of images, and that can cost you performance. That's really important for you to focus on images when it comes to performance, and Next.js image component makes it really easy. Now that we have our card component, let's just add the image and learn the Next.js image component right here. This component also does a lot. It is a very powerful API that we will be covering in this specific lesson. Instead of using the typical HTML image element, we will be using the specific image component from Next image. Copy this and head over to the code. Let's just add it over here and get rid of this. Now image will be from Next image, so I'm gonna import that right here. And now if we take a look, we have the all tag and we have the source tag. In source, we are gonna take an image URL prop, which is what we have defined here, and in alt we can just call this the name. You can see see that it gives us an error saying that invalid source prof. Now you typically get this error, and you can read more information here, but you typically get this error when you haven't necessarily defined the subdomains that you will be using inside of your project. So what we need to do is copy this, go to next config and add it here. Now, if you may be wondering what is the host name that we need to add, well, if we take a look at the app products array that we have here, in the image URL, we are using rest.cloudinary.com where I've hosted this specific image on Cloudinary. So in that case, we can just paste what we copied, and we don't have any specific port. We just want to allow it on all ports, and we want to also allow it on all paths, so you can also get rid of that. Now, if we refresh the page, you should see an image, but obviously the image is not matching the styling that we want, and so let's head over to the documentation for that. Now, what we need is we want the image to be basically the cover of the card, and we also don't want a specific width and height. We just want to kind of match to the parent element so that it just fills in the width and height of the parent itself. And so for that, let's just set a specific style. Now, whenever we want to add a specific style to the underlying image element, we can just pass it in using the style prop. So what we could do is, if we go to the card component, we have the width and height here. We can also pass in a style prop, and we can say it's going to be object fit as cover. We also need one more property, which is going to be layout equals fill. Not have width and height alongside layout, so let's just remove it. And now as we do that, you can see that the image is now a cover. Now, if you head over to optimizing image section in the docs, here layout fill is quite important to prevent any sort of layout shift. What exactly is layout shift? If we head over to image sizing, one of the ways that images most commonly hurt performance is through layout shift, where images get pushed, when the image pushes other element around the page. Now, if you take a look at the specific documentation on cumulative layout shift, it is a core web vital. That means Google is going to rank your website based on this specific core web vital. It's a very important metric you need to consider. So if the images just suddenly bump down the content, the user may accidentally click on something that they shouldn't be clicking on. So keep this in mind. This is a really good example here. The user wants to go back, but they end up placing an order because the content just immediately loads. Not exactly what we want. So that's what cumulative layout shift is. And scroll down, if you click on the specific documentation, you can read more on adding, always including the width and height, and or reserve the required space using CSS aspect ratio. But thanks to the image component, it does have the fill property, which allows the image to be sized by its parent element. So if you don't know the size of images, that's totally okay. So that's what we are doing here. We don't know the size of the images, but we're just saying layout fill. And we need to make sure that relative is also defined here, which makes it position relative. And using fill, the parent element must have position relative. This is necessary for proper rendering of the image element in that specific layout mode. So that is very essential for us to do that. But there is this weird spacing here, and that's because of this width that we don't necessarily need. So we can get rid of. Similarly, one last thing we need to do is, since this is a cover image, we also want the corners to be rounded. And for that, we could use a property in Tailwind called as rounded T. So we can copy this and add it in class name here. So we can just say class name rounded T. There you go. So now if you go back, you can see how the image is basically rounded. The top left and top right corners are essentially rounded, which is what you exactly want here. Let's just add the remaining styling so that we can display all the products and head over to setting up our database. Let's just add some styling here. So again, I'm gonna provide the styling for us. So let's just paste the specific structure here. You can also find the same code inside of GitHub. Again, what we're trying to do is we are giving it some styling. We are making it so that the layout matches. So we are saying that, hey, these two are flex columns. This is going to be a grid with 3 columns, but as you shrink, it's going to be 2 and 1. Similarly, these are 4 columns at the bottom, but as you shrink, it's going to be 3 and then 2 and then eventually 1. So that's exactly what we have pasted right here. Let's just move our card products at the bottom here. Similarly, we can move our products here as well. Now, if we go back to our app, you can already see how the app is looking. Now, I've definitely zoomed in here a bit. So this is how it'll look like, but I'm going to keep the zoom back on so that you can see all the content on the page. So here you have the all products as well as our top products. So now our page is looking really good. So let's go ahead and set up Supabase. Now, Supabase would be what we would be using to create our database because Supabase powers that. But any time the user goes ahead and uploads the product from this specific form or any of these existing products, all of them are going to live inside Supabase. Supabase is an open source Firebase alternative. You can start your project with a Postgres database, so that's exactly what we would be using. But it's not just that, it also offers authentication, edge functions, real-time subscriptions. You can also store a bunch of stuff, such as we will be storing all our images in here as well. So Supabase does a lot. Now let's go ahead and start your project. Now I have already logged in because I'm already logged in, but you need to sign up using Supabase and it's completely free of charge, so you can just get started. So now let's go ahead and click on new project, and here I'm just gonna call this Next.js Crash Course, but feel free to call whatever you like. Here I'm just gonna select a password and going to select a server closest to me. Now let's go ahead and create this project. So now as the project is getting set up, we can see these API keys and we also see this URL. So now what we can do is just copy this key and then head over to our editor and let's create a new file here called as .n. Now in here we're just gonna call Supabase URL and Supabase key. Let's just paste what we copied and also copy this URL and paste that here as well. All right, so now we have our environment stored and ready to go. Now, as the project is set up, which it just did, now we can go ahead and create a new table. Now, what's really cool about Supabase is that it does help you a lot, and it also gives us this really good interface so we can interact with it without having to fully go command line if you don't want to. So for example, if you go to the table editor, you can create new tables, but you also have a SQL editor here where you can create a new table through this specific query, and it does have Supabase AI to build the query as well. Plus, they also have so many different templates that you can use to essentially create anything you want. Then we can have our database tables stored here. But at the same time, there's a bunch of powerful options here too. Then Supabase also powers authentication. Now, we won't be implementing authentication in this specific course, but if you want to add authentication and extend this course, then you can totally do that as well. You can store everything here, and we will be storing our images here. So let's just call this storage. Let's make this a public bucket and save it. So now anyone can upload all the images here. What we are going to do is we are going to upload the Supabase images that I already have and upload them here. Now these are essentially the images that you see here. So what we're doing is we are storing the database with a bunch of different products already, so we can query them and show it onto our page. So as you can see, we have all these different products, all these different images. So now let's go to our table editor and create a new table. So now we are going to call this easy sell products. Feel free to call whatever you like, but the more you stick to the naming convention that I'm using, then you won't get lost as much. Now let's go ahead and create a new column. So let's just call this name. Now we can select any of these data types, but we are going to use this as a text, and we are going to make this a text. Now over here, let's just call this description. Description is also going to be text. Then we have image URL, also going to be text. But keep this in mind that as you create these new fields, it can be any of these. Now let's also use price here, add price here, and then let's make this a float so that it also accounts for any decimals. And then we also have a property called as boost, which is going to be a Boolean property, and by default it's going to be false. Now boost is what we would be using to show all our top products. So if boost is true, then they will show up here. Otherwise, it's by default false. Then we also have contact email. So folks know where to contact the person who created the specific listing. So now let's also make this text. So we already have our table ready to go. Now, one thing I do want to call out is we want ID to be UUID, and UUID is essentially a function already that they have, which automatically will create a UUID for us, a universally unique identifier that it will just generate, which is pretty awesome. Similarly, the created at date will also use now as a default value. So whenever we create the specific table. So now let's just go ahead and save this. Now it's adding the 8 columns and creating the table for us. Alrighty, so now we have our table ready to go. We have all the fields that are necessary and we have created them, which is pretty awesome. So now what we could do is we could insert a specific row one by one, or we could import the data from CSV. Now again, I have all the CSV file, which you can also download as well. well. So you can just drop it in here. Now, these CSV files is essentially mapped exactly to the columns that we have, so which are pretty much the same. So we can keep them as is. And now let's go ahead and import the data. There you go. We already now have the list of rows, the list of products that we will be using to show here. And now you can also see that certain properties are true, which is this Jeep, which is this mushroom lamb, and also this sneakers. That's exactly what we see here. Mushroom lamb, Jeep, and these sneakers. So now let's go ahead and connect Supabase with our Next.js project so we can start querying the database. Now, one more thing to note is that as you go to view policies, this table is going to return an empty array of results if you don't provide some sort of a policy, for example. Now, we are going to just disable row level security. That means anyone can publicly read and write data into the table. Now, typically what you would want is the authenticated users be able to write and read data. But for this specific crash course, we'll be only focusing on giving everyone public access to read and write data. But feel free to extend it in the future to whatever you like. We want to fetch data from Supabase and basically fetch the products that we have added inside of our database table, which is our easy sell products table. And we want to show it all on the page here and replace this dummy data altogether. That is our goal, for example. But before we do that, we need to learn how we can fetch data. Now, there are a few different mechanisms that you can fetch data inside of Next.js, and I also have this really handy diagram that we will take a look at as well. But as we do that, one thing you do need to know is how caching works inside of Next.js. You cannot talk about data fetching in Next.js without thinking about caching as well, because you may wonder a lot of times why my data is stale. I'm doing everything right, but nothing seems to work. And that's the answer to that is caching. So what caching does is that it improves your application performance and it helps reduce costs and unnecessary network requests. So when you do, let's say, get data from Supabase, then it's going to store that data. It's going to cache that data until you tell Next.js otherwise. So Next.js does a lot of caching by default. So what you need to do is understand how it works under the hood so that you can understand what caching mechanism to opt into and how to opt out of. So now there are a few ways you can cache data inside of Next.js. Now, request memoization. This is very typical. For example, in Next.js, automatically memoizes requests that have the same URL and options. And memoization simply means that it's going to cache a lot of the request data. So let's say in the same network request, you're making 2 requests at the same time, then it's only going to call once and just store that. And this is very typical in the React world. We use APIs such as use memo hook, for example, to cache data and to between re-renders. Or we also have memo as well, which allows you to skip re-rendering a component when props are changed. So we are already familiar with memoization in general. So Next.js does this on the server itself. And what it does is that it basically tries to avoid making multiple network requests. But this is not the one I'm talking about when I come to caching and stale data. What we are mainly talking about is these 3 things: data cache, full route cache, and router cache. When you think of data cache, what it does is that it will basically store the data across several user requests, and it is persistent. So even if you refresh the page, it's going to still stay. It has stored that data somewhere on the server, and you're going to get that same data back. So even if you change things in your request, because you haven't opted out of caching, or if you haven't updated caching the right way, then this specific data will stay the same. So this is the data cache I'm talking about. The way they do that is by using something called as fetch. Now, we already are familiar with fetch. Now, if you go to fetch on MDN, this is the fetch API I'm talking about. What Next.js does is that it extends the specific fetch API from the browser to add their own flavor of caching. So there are 3 different types of caching you can do inside of fetch. It has a property called as cache force cache. So anytime you use fetch inside of Next.js, this property is there by default. It's going to cache all the time. And this is what trips many beginner developers up, because your data is going to be stale. And you may wonder why it's not updating. Second is this one, where you can revalidate the data, and this caches for everyone 1 hour. So every 1 hour, a request will be made and that data will be stale, but the following one will get the latest request. Then we have server-side rendering, which means there's no caching and it fetches every single time. So these are three different ways. You can call this static side generation, incremental static regeneration, or server-side rendering. But if you go back to this specific diagram, there's also routing cache. So again, as the user routes from one route to the other, then again, it will render and cache routes at build time. If you are going from one content to the other and you're trying to fetch data, it's going to basically try to access what data it already has and show that to you. Now, again, this is an optimization that allows you to serve the cache route instead of rendering on the server. Again, this is something that it does as well. And lastly, there's also router cache too. That means it will reduce server requests on navigation. And again, this is something that we will take a look at when we talk about server actions. But all of this caching is really important for you to understand when you think of data fetching. So the three APIs that we took a look at was on the server, fetching data on the server with fetch, which basically means we can fetch the data. By default, it's forced cache. Then you can revalidate data, that is every hour or every X seconds, you can purge the cache and refetch the latest data. And that is basically time-based revalidation. You can add this number in seconds. And lastly, we also have server-side rendering, which basically means cache no store. If you want to opt out of data caching completely, then you can add cache no store to fetch requests. These are a few ways you can fetch data and add these different APIs itself. So now let's go ahead and use Supabase and fetch data from the server. So when it comes to using Supabase, we will be using these specific packages. So let's just go ahead and install them. So what we can do is just install these packages. And then we already have these two environment variables as defined automatically. So what we are going to do is just copy this code and head over to our editor. And let's create a new folder here called it Supabase. Or I guess let's call this client. And here, let's just call this file supabase.ts. And now what we can do is we can just remove use client. We don't need it. And here, let's create a function called as create client. Now I'm a big fan of the ES6 syntax, so that's what I'm going to use. So let's just do create client. Our environment variable, we don't have next public, so we are just gonna use it directly. Inside of our page, we can basically start calling Supabase here. So what we can do is go to the Supabase documentation and then let's go ahead and call whatever we want. So in our case, it's easy sell products. We can basically just select specific columns or get your data or whatever we want using the Supabase API. What we can do is just copy this and then head over to our page and then paste it. Now we do want Supabase here and we do want to make this an async function so that we can call Supabase. And for that, what we could do is we need to initialize the Supabase instance. So here we can say Supabase and we can call this create client that we got from Supabase itself. Now let's just reverse this because this needs to be Supabase and this can be a client because that makes it more obvious when we import it. Whoops, here this can stay the same. And here instead of client Supabase, we'll say Supabase/client. All right, this looks much better. Let's make sure that we are fully returning the client itself. All right, so now here, let's just add easy sell products and let's just select the products itself. So now let's just log them at the server again. Go to localhost 3001. Our page should have run. So if you go to the terminal, now you can see that all our products are right here. We got all the products from the data. That means our Supabase connection works. But I want to talk about something here. By default, Supabase is using fetch internally. That means they are essentially using forced cache. That means this data is cached now. Let's go ahead and replace the products data with this data and see what happens. So now if I comment this out and let's call this products, get rid of this altogether. Because a lot of our column names are the same, we can select it, or we need to handle this condition that if there are no products, then what do we do? Well, if there are no products, for example, we can just for now say not found and we will replace this later. So now if we refresh the page, you can see here that this specific image is not working out, because earlier in the cart component, we are just passing in the URL directly, right? So now we need to modify that a little bit. So what we could do is we can pass say image URL, and here let's just say product.image URL, which is what we have, but we need to give it a domain, because right now we don't have a domain yet. So what we could do is inside of our Supabase instance, if we head over to storage, we do get a unique URL here, and the way we would find that URL is by going to this specific location. So let's just get rid of this. Now let's go here and paste it, and let's just save this for now. Now this specific URL is the same as what we have inside the Supabase URL. So what we could do is we can access anything, any URL with Supabase URL. So let's go ahead and configure that as well. So now if you go here and let's just duplicate it and just paste what we copied earlier. Whoops, we don't need that. We need this specific subdomain. Now let's just paste it to make sure that there is no HTTPS here, because that's what's taken care of by Next.js for us. So what we need to do is copy the same thing and do it here as well. Now if you go back, you can see the images are showing up already and our app is looking quite good. But obviously we need to add another query to filter this, but our Supabase is working as it is. So now let's revisit our caching, data fetching, caching principles. So now, as you remember, cache is forced cache by default. So this means that these values are cached now. They're not going to change. So if I go to the database and go to any of these products, so let's just go with yellow couch. And I'm going to say yellow couch. I'm going to say this is a pink couch. No more a yellow couch, even though it's a yellow couch. Watch what happens. This is a yellow couch, but if I refresh the page, it still stays as a yellow couch. There is no word pink here at all. Or if we want to be even more clear, let's replace this value 2000 with $0. This is a free product, but again, still 2000. It does not change whatsoever. So one way is that what we could do is just get rid of this folder where all our caching is stored. We can just restart the server, refresh the page again. And now you can see that it's actually a pink couch with $0. So now, just like that, we saw that how force cache was making it impossible for us to refetch the latest data. Now, if we were to do that inside of this code, there's no way for us to do that because we don't have access to fetch. Fetch is internally called by Supabase. So now this is fine because a lot of our data is going to be static. But let's say we change the name or we fix a typo, then we definitely want every few seconds or every few hours for the data to no longer remain stale. In that case, what we could do is we could either choose to revalidate the data every hour or every few seconds, or we could just server-side render it all the time. So what we could do here with Supabase, in order for us to expose it, we can add a property called as revalidate equals 0, which means our data is going to be fresh all the time. So now let's change this value to yellow couch and $2,000 that we had earlier. We can just say $2,000 and this is gonna be yellow couch again. And if we refresh the page, you can already see it is a yellow couch with $2,000. Same thing over here as well, because the value is now no longer going to be cached. It has taken basically cache no store. It doesn't force cache every single time. It fetches data every single time, which is pretty awesome. But in our case, we do want to make sure that we cache it as much as possible because we want our site to be really fast. We don't want to refetch new data. It's not like there's going to be new data all the time. Maybe we want to refetch new products that we add to the Supabase table, maybe every hour or something. Then what we could do is we can just add 3600. This means that our data is going to be now fetched every hour, which is what we have here. It is going to be cached for every hour, and on the hour mark, whoever requests the data will still get stale data, but the following request will be fresh data, which is what we want. So that's the beauty of these specific products inside of our application. So that is the beauty of Next.js. You can basically cache data. It can definitely trip you up if you don't understand caching. In top products, we only want the products that are boosted. That means the products that have property equals true. And right now we are showing all the products. So what we need to do is perform another query here and basically filter through the reference tables. So we can copy this code, go here, and again, let's just call this, we need to change this. So we can just say top products and maybe top products error, for example. And now we want to select all, but we do want to say out of all the values, give me boost as true. And that's the value that we have here. So instead of products here in the first section, we will have top products. Again, we need to perform the same condition that if it's null, then just show not found. So if no top products, then not found, for example. Now it's saying not found. Well, that's because we are calling cities, which doesn't exist. Let's just call this easy products. There you go. So now our top products are also ready to go. We have 3 products which has boost equals true, and all the other products are towards the bottom. But did you notice how inside of our code, when there were no top products, then how the entire page returned not found because of this? Well, that's not what we want, right? Because even if there are no top products, it's not the end of the world. But if there are no products, maybe we don't want to show anything then. What we could do is we could say if there are top products, then only map through them, because otherwise we don't even want to show anything really. So now if we remove this condition completely, and now in top products, we can just move this. What we could do here is make a typo. Now you can see how it says there are no top products here, for example. We could say, hey, if there are top products, then only show them. Else, it's going to be a p tag. All our products are gone. Now, if I go back to making a typo again, then it says all our products are gone. We'll fix the padding in a second. Here we can say pt is going to be 12, and we can make this text excel. All our products are gone, and also change the color to be 800. So now this looks more like it, where all our products are gone. And again, we can give this 16 so that it's more aligned. But again, in this case, it's not gonna be this case at all. So we can just go back to how it was. But now, in case there are, let's say, no products whatsoever, then we do want to return something. We don't want to return not found like this. We don't want to show the page at all, because what's the point if there are no products? So in that case, what we will do is we will use the not found file inside of Next.js. Now, if you remember, took a look at a lot of the special files. One of the special file is not found. This means whenever there is a not found file, we can basically replace the content of the page to say, hey, products are not found, essentially. And we can also use the code. So for example, if I open this up, when the not found function is thrown, so if I throw not found, which is imported from Next navigation inside my code, then also this specific page will get triggered. So what we could do is we could say not found from Next navigation, and let's see what happens. So now if I make a typo here, then you can see how it says this page could not be found. Now we could choose to style it, but let's just keep it as is for now. But this is what the not found file does, which is essentially a special file inside of Next.js. Alrighty, so now let's go back to what we had, and let's just refresh the page. Now you can see that our page is looking quite good. So now what we want is when we click on a specific image, we do want the user to navigate to the product page, the individual product page, where we can fetch more data. So right now our app doesn't do that. A way we could do that is by using the Next.js component. Now it is a React component that again extends the HTML anchor link element to provide prefetching and client-side navigation between routes. So again, we have taken a look at the link component earlier, but let's take a look at it a little bit in depth. Again, if they are internal links, that means we are going from one page to another page that is in the same app, then definitely use the link component, because you will get capabilities like prefetching. Now, what exactly is prefetching? Well, let's take a look. Now, I have our Next.js Crash Course Theta Versal app ready to go. It's hosted on a domain. So now let's go ahead and make this image maybe a tablet size. Go into again empty cache and hard reload. And now you can see that not as many images were there on the page. Only 5 of them are here. Now let's clear this. Let's start scrolling. As we scroll, more and more images get downloaded onto the page. But initially, on initial load, not all images were downloaded. And that is the beauty of prefetching. Prefetching allows you to basically prefetch content onto the page as they become visible in the user's viewport. As the user loads the page, and as things are about to come in view through scrolling, routing, that is when Next.js will prefetch. And that is the advantage of using link component. So you want to make sure that you use the link component wherever possible whenever we are routing between pages. So to revisit our header component here, we are using the link component to navigate from one page to the other. Let's go ahead and add routing between pages inside of our application. Let's just copy this. And now what we are going to do is in the card component is where we are going to surround this entire component with link. Why? Because what we want is as a user clicks on one card, we want the user to navigate to the other one. So that's what we're doing here. But instead of href, we are going to basically route to another route. So what we can do here is we can say basically route to products. If we take a look at a reference here, products, and let's just give it the ID, for example. So we are already passing the ID from Supabase directly into the component. So this should work if everything is set up correctly. If I click on this, look at that, we did route. But if you think about it, this is a page not found because this page does not exist. We need to create it. So let's go ahead and create it. So now in order for us to create a page, a dynamic route inside of Next.js, the way we could do that is by using box brackets. So here we could say products because that's the page we want to navigate to, and then create another folder called as slug, and inside that let's create page.tsx. This is how you create dynamic routes inside of Next.js. So now we can just call this page. So it will be this. Now I can just say one hello here and see what happens. Since we're already routed to this specific route, it does say hello. So now if I click on Jeep Wrangler, then again, it's a new ID, but hello text. So now we have created a dynamic route as well. So that's what dynamic routes are inside Next.js. When you don't know the exact segment names ahead of time, and you want to create routes that could be dynamic in nature. For example, if you take a look at this diagram, then slug is a dynamic route. Now we don't necessarily know in this case that what the ID is going to be. So it's going to be pretty dynamic. And that is why we have defined it a dynamic route. So this could be /product /123 456 ABCD, doesn't matter, because that's the dynamic value. And this is how you create the route inside of Next.js. But there's also something called as catch all routes. And what this means is we define it by calling ... slugs with box bracket. And with catch all routes, what happens is the value could be /AB /A/B or /A/AB/C and so on. So these values could be whatever, but it was going to be caught in this specific route. Now, what happens then? Well, if I define 1 to 3 and I also define a catch-all route, what would take priority? Well, this dynamic route will get priority because it's more defined in structure, whereas catch-all route is going to be caught after dynamic route. So if I say /1 to 3, it will be caught here. But if I say /1 to 3 /1 to whatever, then it will be caught here. So that's how routing works. And even though I'm using the word routes, Next.js uses a word called as segments, and that's pretty much the same as well. So an app directory is a root segment, dashboard is a segment, this is a leaf segment. So dashboard becomes a segment, this becomes a leaf segment. So essentially this would be a dynamic segment, route /segment. This would be a index route, or this would be a catch-all segment or route. So now we will be building the product page, which is this specific page, which has an image, price, if it's a premium product or not, and this will depend if the property boost is true or false, text, and a button. Whenever you click on the button, then the email application opens up with this specific text. At the bottom, there will be description as well with some styling around it. I'm going to be providing all the styling and the structure of the page so we can get into integrating it with Supabase later on. So now what we could do here is what we need is data. Now this data could pretty much be copied from here. Just copy this whole thing and paste it here. We can call this data and then just comment this out. Now this data will essentially be displayed onto the page before we start integrating that with Supabase. So now let me just give you the structure of the page so that we could just focus on building the application. So I'm going to paste the structure. Again, it's very similar to what we had. It does have one additional property, which is contact email, and boost is false. But other than that, this basically gives the structure to the entire page. We have the description, we have contacting the seller, and this basically adds a mail to prefix, which means it's going to just open up the default mailing application with the contact email portion. Now we will also have premium product section if data.boost is true, and we have the name and also the image added as well. This image does have a fixed width and height compared to earlier, but we are basically getting the URL which needs to be replaced with our process.n.supabase URL. All right, so now if we head over to the page, not here, over here, and refresh the page, then we should see the everything. Look at that. Now our page is looking quite good, but the image obviously needs to change to data.image URL that we have. Now you can see orange lamp is getting displayed, but obviously we are going to quickly replace this with Supabase. So let's just comment this specific URL out over here as well. Now by opting into revalidate equals 3600, it means that by default, all the pages, all the products, all the cards in this page are going to be static, but then every hour it's going to refetch the data again, call Supabase and get us fresh data essentially. Now this is what revalidate 3600 does. But we also need to define for these individual pages which data will be static and how it can regenerate all the pages. So when we go and run npm run build here, this creates a production build, and what this does is it basically goes through a function called as generate static params, and it will statically pre-build all the routes. That means it's going to pre-download all the data from Supabase and then generate all the routes for you. Now in our case right now, it has only generated 5 pages. It has /product/slug, but it has not pre-generated any of the pages that we have. Let's restart the server again. It has not basically pre-generated any of the pages that we do have. That is all of these pages. If we want the performance of static with combination of dynamic, then we need to give Next.js information to pre-generate all the pages. And the way we could do that is by using a function called as generate static params. It statically generates all the routes at build time instead of on demand at request time. So what we need to do is implement this specific function. What we need to do here is what it wants is a list of all the slugs that we have. So what we could do here is again get the Supabase client, create the function here from here. So we can just copy this whole thing, paste it, copy Supabase, initialize it here, and import create client from locally. Then let's get the second function here, and what we want is exactly what they're doing here. We are getting all the products. So all the products are here. Now if products are not null, then they are going to be returned here. So products.map, and this is going to be product, and this is going to be product. And instead of slug, it's going to be ID, because that's what we get from Supabase. If products, then that's what it will return. So maybe by default, if there are no products, then it's just going to return an array. But if there are products, then it's going to just default return all of them. You can get rid of array here, and this as well. What this would do is it would give you the slugs of all the IDs from Supabase. And this tells Next.js that, hey, generate all these routes with these specific IDs. So then it's going to execute this function. So now if we run npm run build again, let's see what happens. It should give us the list of all the 7 IDs. Now you can see already that all these IDs are created. So now these 3 IDs along with 9 more paths that are created for us, that are pre-generated for us, because we chose to add generate static params function here. But obviously the static page stays the same, so we need to obviously replace this data as well. But this is how you implement generate static params in Next.js. So what we could do here is, instead of getting this data here, again initialize the client. And now this time what we are going to do is, instead of just selecting all the data, we are going to filter it. So we're going to select all the data, but now we are going to call match on Supabase, and this could be any query we want. So here we're going to say ID from the database is going to be the slug. Now we don't have slug yet, so let's just call data.id for now. And here we are going to return a single record, because we know that there could only be one specific ID. We're just going to return a single record. Now we want this to be slug that we get from Next.js. And the way we could do that is putting it from params and then defining it as well. So let's just define props here. So now we can say type props, and params there will be params in them. There will be params which will have slug as string from the URL, as well as there will be search params, but we don't need to worry about that for now. So here we can just say params.slug. Now this this just gets the params and then dot slug. So now instead of products, it's going to have only one single product. So we can just get it from data. We can comment this data out completely. So now if everything works as expected, then we need to restart the server again. Remember, we commented out the URL. So let's just do this. Just copy this and let's paste it here. Backticks. Now let's refresh the page and look at that. We are getting real data from the database. So now if I go back to home, go to gWrangler, I see gWrangler, and it is a premium product because Boost is in fact true for just the gWrangler itself. And if I click on contact seller, then it does get us to interested in purchasing gWrangler and opens up my mail client as well. So that's exactly what we want. So it's finally time for us to talk about server actions and mutations. Now you can think of server components for fetching data, then you can think of server actions for mutating data on the server. So they are essentially asynchronous functions that are executed on the server. They're typically used on form submission. For example, upload form is the perfect example for us to use server actions. And we will be learning a lot about server actions, validations with Zod, and so on. So I don't want you to get intimidated, but follow along as I teach each concept one by one. I also have a video on server actions and mutations. So if you want one more example alongside this one, then definitely check that out as well. So if we head over to the documentation and go to examples, you should see that this create invoice is a perfect example of server action. We have a form, we have this action attribute, and Next.js makes it special where we can inject server action and it allows us use server directive here. So how about let's just go and try it out. Now in order for us to use server action, we need to create a attribute here called action. We need to define the action here. So let's just say sell your item action. And now we need to create a function. So now since we are going to do a lot in server actions, let's just create a folder called as actions. And here let's just create an index.ts file. Now we are going to make this an async function, sell your item. And now we are going to declare this a use server. This makes it a server action. Now, in order for us to use and inject server action like this in a separate file, we need to use a hook called as use form state. So we can just copy this hook and here let's just paste it. Now let's import it from React DOM. And in the function here will be sell your item action, which we're going to import, and there will be some initial state. Now, form will no longer take action directly, but instead now it will take the return type of form action from use form state, because this is the one that manages and updates the state of our form. And in initial state, we are going to have two things, message and errors. This way, if there are any errors, we can show it to the user and so on. For now, let's just define this as any. All right, then let's go to actions. And now action is going to take previous data or previous state, and it's going to also take one more attribute, which is form data, which is of type form data. Now let's just console log form data. Let's go to our server, refresh the page, and let's just hit add. You can see now form data does get printed, but obviously we want specific values inside form data. So for that, we could say that, okay, give me the name in form data. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to say Ankita is the name, and let's just hit add, and you can see Ankita right here. So this is how we could pass data from the form to the server actions itself. Now what we are going to do is define the form completely and use a TypeScript first schema validation library called as Zod, static type inference. And what this library does, and it allows us to perform form validations on the server side. This way, we could use a function called as safe parse. We define the schema and call safe parse, and it will return two things to us. It will either give us a success or a error. If there's a success, then it will give us data. If not, then it will just give us what was the problem. So what we could do is just copy it and paste it in here. Now we definitely need to define the schema, so let's do that. Say schema is going to be Zod.object. But first, let's just install Zod. As Zod got installed, let's restart the server. And now let's import Zod here. So we can say import Z from Zod. Destructure it just like that. Now schema is going to have the safe parse property, but this is where we could start defining the schema itself. We could say that, hey, this just like the user object, we could say that, hey, our our form is going to be this whole object, and it's going to be of type string, or if it's going to be of type any of these primitive types, primitive values. And then we can basically define more things, such as make sure that the email has minimum 5 characters, or make sure it's a number, and so on. So what we could do is just copy this part, and now let's just declare it here. Here it would be name and string. Same thing for description. Then we are also going to have contact email. Price is also going to be string. And the reason why price is a string is because form data has a limitation where you cannot have a number as form data, so it needs to be a string itself. Now let's define image URL in a second, but let's add some validations here. So in the schema, we can say, hey, I want name to be minimum 4 characters. I want description to be minimum 5 characters. I want contact email to have minimum 1 character, and it needs to be email itself. And if it's not a valid email, then we can just say this is not a valid email address. Similarly, for price, we can make sure it's actually minimum 1. And then for image URL, we need to do something more. So this way we can add our schema definition here. And now we need to basically parse the data from form data. Now notice how we got name from form data. Similarly, we need to get a bunch of other fields as well. Save parse, we can just create an object and say name is going to be form data.get name. So now we have our schema and defined, and we are parsing it safely as well. Now, if it, let's just call, instead of result, let's just call this validated fields. And if they are not successful, then let's throw an error, or let's return the data. So now here, instead of error, we can just say return type is going to be error, and here return type is going to be success. This way we can check for that if you want. But type is error, then errors are going to be validate fields dot error, and then I just flatten them and call field errors. Similarly, let's just enter the message as well, saying that some fields were missing. Failed to create product. So we're just adding some validation here. Similarly, if it is successful, then we can just return successful. Instead of just adding it here, we can just return data. Type is success. So console log the error here. So we can say error validated fields dot error. So let's just check we get all the data necessary. So we can just say name, name, then we have description, we have contact email. Let's see what happens. Enter. Like I said, it does give us a validation message like we wanted. Refresh the page and do this again. And then let's add the lamp and the email. Now you can see that we have all the information here. We have the file, we have all these details. Now, in case of any errors, we definitely want to show that over here so that we know we're not making any mistakes while submitting the form. So for that reason, now we're just returning type success. Let's make sure that if there are any errors, then we are also sending those as well. And we don't necessarily need to return anything for success for now. Let's just handle the errors. So if we go to the upload page here, and let's just add this as any for now. And now at the bottom, we want to make sure that there are errors here. So one thing we could do for adding errors is basically handle them. If in server actions, if we are returning errors and the type is error itself, like we say over here, and in that case, we want to show this message to the user. We want to show whatever message that comes up. This is the message that the full form sends us when we submit. But then there were other messages that we saw as well. So what we do here is right above the form, we can say if state.type is error, then we want to handle it specifically. Then we can say is error, and then let's wrap that up in error, and we can say state.message like we discussed. Close it. Now already have the styling for it, so let's just paste that here. Now if I had submit, now you can see it says failed to create product missing field, which is what we want. So that's pretty good. But we also want to show all of these values, because so that means that's an error array itself, and we want to show the message from that. So for that, we could do state.errors, try to look for those accordingly. So again, right underneath name, we can say if state.errors.name, then we want to show a span here with state.errors.name.join. So we are separating them if there are multiple errors, and we are joining them all. Now again, we can style this as well. So now if I hit submit, you can already see that string must contain 4 characters is already displayed here. Similarly, we want to do the same thing under price. Perfect. So now you can see all the errors underneath it, which is what we want. So if I hit add without submitting it, then you can see all these things. So we know exactly what the errors are. So that's how Zord makes our life so much easier, because it is such strict validation that the user can see what's going on. When it comes to entering information inside the Supabase database on the form submission, it's going to be pretty straightforward, because here we have the insert API. We're going to insert all the details as an object. We're going to get all the data from Zord, schema parser, and then enter it all in the database. The tricky part is going to be image URL. Now, remember we had to upload all the images in our bucket called storage. So what we need to first do is, whenever a user submits a form, we first need to upload the image in the bucket and then reference it in the database. That's exactly what we're doing here. That's why we have these random IDs. So what we could do is use the storage API, here, which basically means that we just get the files and then upload them. So let's just copy this and then go to server actions and paste the code. So if it's not success, then don't do anything, return the error. Otherwise, just do this. But there's one more thing we need to do. We need to also create a special Supabase server action client, because we're invoking now Supabase inside, not a browser, but inside of a server. So for that, we definitely need to create a server action client. So we could declare Supabase here and then create server action client and pass in the cookies. Now these cookies will be something that can be retrieved from Next headers, and then we can get the Supabase client, create server action client from Supabase auth helpers Next.js. We just need to fill this data. So we were at data and error storage, and then from this would be the bucket name itself, and we just called this bucket name storage. So let's just keep that. This would be the name of the image, and this would be the actual image itself. So we could retrieve all the information now, because we know that name, image URL, then we have contact email, we have description, price. All of that we could get it from validated fields.data, and let's add this whole thing in a try catch block, so that way in case of any errors, we can also catch them. So here you can just add console error. Perfect. So now, as usual, we want to make sure that we return the error. So again, type is going to be error. This way, if there are any problems, then we want to make sure that we're handling it. So we can just say database error, fail to create product. Perfect. Whew, that's a lot of code, and I really am glad that you're following along with me. But we are very close to uploading the storage data, and then we are going to insert the data as well. So now over here, let's just give it the file name. So what we can do is, the file name could be math.random, and I'll tell you why that is. Hyphen, and here we could have the image URL.name. Now the reason why we are adding math.random is because if I don't add this math.random value, then a user could enter the same name image, and this would mean that it would just replace that image. That's not what we want. So for that reason, we're adding this unique number. So this is the math.random value, and now this could be file name, and this could be the image URL itself. But there's one more thing we need to have, is we're going to also add cache control, so that the image gets cached in the browser, and at the same time, we are also going to say we're not going to overwrite the file if it exists, for example. This way, whatever file is there stays. Alright, so now we have this. So if it's an error, just in case, then we want to say type is going to be error, and the message is going to be database error, failed to upload image. This way we know that there's a problem with the image. But if there's no problem with the image itself, then we are good. And now we can perform insert as well. So for that, let's just go to the documentation, and here let's just copy this. Now we can just paste it, and we are going to call this easy sell products, and now we want to just return everything from here, and this could be products error. And we want to return everything from here, except we want to make sure that we get the path from data, and that's it. Now we are going to just get data.path from Supabase storage. As we get that, then we can just add that path here. This way, we are storing this specific path inside of our image URL column. We can reference it later. Alrighty, so now we only want to call data.path if it exists. So let's just move all of this inside here. Alright, so now we have a lot going on. We have so many things that we have done, but we're also handled errors. So hopefully if we made a mistake, then we should be able to see it. Let's refresh the page. And now let's add the mushroom lamp, the redefine that we've been wanting to. 3400 description. Let's add mushroom lamp here, and let's just give it the email address. Now let's hit add, and it says database error, failed to create product, which is what we want if there's an error. So let's see what the error is. Here it says either next public Supabase are required. For this specific server action client, we need to make sure that this is actually in fact next public, so that it gets exposed to it. So what we need to do is just copy next, prefix it with next public. So now wherever we are calling Supabase, we need to make sure that we are passing it next public itself. So now in the client over here, we want to make sure we're passing it next public URL. Similarly, we are passing super anon key as well. Now we need to reset the server because we updated the environment variable. Now let's refresh the page and try again. Mushroom lamp predefined 400 description. Let's add the lamp. All right. Now it says that new row violates row level security policy. Now what we need to do for that is we need to go to storage policy. So when we hit storage, click on policies, we need to create a new policy and create a policy from scratch. Here we need to say, let's give access to all. So we can just insert, update, delete to everyone, and default to all if none selected. And let's just hit review and save policy. That's all we need to do. So now if we go back and hit add, you can see that nothing happens, but the error goes away. And looks like it has worked. So if we go to table editor and go to products, we should see a new product. Look at that. Mushroom lamp redefine has been added. You can see the image here as well. But now if we go back to easy sell, so we need to change one quick thing here. It says undefined, but rest of the URL is quite defined. Well, that's because after we changed the Supabase URL to say next public, we did not really change the prefix of that. So we need to also call this next public, because otherwise it's not defined in environment anymore. Do the same over here as well. Hide the page itself, which is right here as well as right here. Now look at that. We have all our cards rendered and ready to go. And the mushroom lamp that we just created, which is mushroom lamp redefined, is also added here with the values extracted. Now if I click on the image, then we also see the description that we added, the mushroom lamp defined. And if I contact the seller, then it's also at me@me.com, which is awesome. So this means our upload form is ready to go. So let's say I add Chemex coffee, for example. And here I'm going to say $900. Again, Chemex coffee, whatever. And for now, let's just give it a image, upload a coffee image. And again, just give it whatever, for example, and hit add. Now, even though the image and this specific product is added in our database, we refresh it, you can see that Chemex coffee does get added, but in our page, it's not necessarily showing up at all. And that's because of caching. Well, we know about this already. We talked about this in the caching section. But if we take a look at revalidating data inside of server action, we need to purge the Next.js cache inside the server action. So if we take a look at the Next.js cache, I mentioned earlier, it also has the router cache and the full route cache essentially. We need to revalidate it. Basically, we need to purge it. So now let's just go to actions, import revalidate path from next cache. And right here, let's just call revalidate path and let's just say /. This means that we are telling Next.js that, hey, there is some new data. Please revalidate the path. But if I click on add and I go here, you can see there are 2 Chemex coffees now. And we will delete one of them, so not to worry. But at the same time, we also want to redirect the user to a new page whenever there is a success. We also need to redirect it. You can use the redirect function from next navigation, and then again redirect it here. So we can say revalidate and redirect. Now it will only reach here if there is data, otherwise it's going to throw an error, for example. So we can also say here, if products error, then we do want to return a error as well. So for example, we can copy this, paste it here, and here instead of failed to upload image, we can say failed to upload product. Now let's try it out again. But if we go here and let's just say Chemex Coffee 3 and let's hit add. The minute we do that, we do get redirected and Chemex Coffee 3 is added. This means we have purged the cache essentially. Now, in order for us to show the loading state inside of our form, so whenever we go to upload, this button should say change from add to loading, and we should show that the form is in progress. Otherwise, the user is going to keep hitting the add button and we are going to see multiple products of the same type, even though they intended to upload only one product. Well, what we could do is a Next.js server actions again. There is a React use form status hook that we could use. Now, this is from React, and it is still an experimental hook, so keep that in mind. But what you could do is it will give you the status information of the last form submission, which is use form status. So what we could do is, again, if you go to the usage, you will see how it works. All you need to do is add this, copy this, and then go inside of your form. So here, let's just paste it, import it from React DOM. And now the button is gonna be replaced with this information. Now, if you go all the way at the bottom, what we need is just copy these values. You already have type as submit. And over here, let's just add this instead of add. Instead of submitting, let's just call this loading. And instead of add, let's just call add. Now let's just go ahead and try it out. Now, if we go to our form, and let's just add Chemex Coffee 4, $20. Let's just add the same duplicate values. Let's add coffee from here, and then let's add a dummy email. Now when we hit add, again, nothing happens. We do get redirected. We have Chemex Coffee 4, but we did not see the loading status. And this is one gotcha you definitely need to know about server actions. What we need to do is we need to extract this into a separate function. Otherwise, it's not gonna work. So we need to create a new component altogether called as submit button.tsx, and here let's just paste this, get the use form status, and we can pretty much just copy this button, paste it here. Similarly, declare submit button here. The gotcha here is you need to make sure that use form status is a child of the form and not in the same form itself. Alrighty, so now that we have this, if we go back to our form and hit upload, let's add Chemex Coffee 5. Make it $90. Description is gonna be 5. Description. Again, let's add coffee, search for it. Now here and hit add. Now you can see the loading state, and once it's done loading, that's when it redirects and shows it on the homepage. And this is how you can implement loading states in server action as well. So now it's finally time for us to start looking at improving our discoverability on search engines. And for that, we will be using something called as SEO. Now, SEO stands for Search Engine Optimization. Search Engine Optimization is a way for search engines to recognize what's exactly on your site. So for example, if we head over to our EasySell app right now, let's say we open up the browser developer tools and we head over to the head element in the page. Now, there is no description of what this specific mushroom lamp is. The title is Create Next App, which is not the title of this specific product. And there is no image as well located or associated with this specific lamp. So if someone were to take this link and share it with their friends, then they're not gonna see any image as well, just to recognize that this is a good product. That's what we would do in SEO. As the user looks for best mushroom lamp, the search engines are then going to work behind the scenes as they look into their database to figure out which site to best serve for this specific query, because they want to make sure, based on your location, based on your preferences, based on what you have searched in the past, based on the different websites and their ranking, they basically rank different websites based on those categories. Now, I won't be diving into too much into how that works. You can look into the SEO starter guide here on how the Google search works and how the SEO is divided into crawling and serving different web pages, and how the ranking works in general. general. And this is a really good guide to take a look at as well. But to give you a quick overview, in SEO, the search engines are working really hard to make sure they give the results that the users are looking for. So let's say they look for best mushroom lamp, and in return, they are getting results like orange lamp, CB2 mushroom lamp, top 5 mushroom lamps, and so on. Now, based on the title, based on the description underneath every image, every title. So for example, there will be some description here underneath it, underneath every element as well as we see it on Google. For example, based on that specific description, users are going to decide if they should click on the site or not. Now, most likely, if you're on the first page of Google, the chances are higher that the users are going to click on it. But what makes it so that the search engines are able to recognize your site? Well, there are quite a few things, but few of the basics are your site should have a really good description. It should tell you exactly what the title is. It should have a canonical URL. That means it should point to the right product when the user clicks on it. It should have proper semantics. That means we should use image element for an HTML image. We should use paragraph tags appropriately for text. We should use different headings for different items and so on. So if your semantics are not right, then search engines won't be able to tell what's exactly on your site. And then there is a lot more that goes behind the scenes in SEO that you need to look at. But these are a few things that we will be configuring in this specific section of the course. Now, just like you and I, we are talking in English, search engines use semantics and all these different things that we talked about to communicate with the website. Because initially, when search engines crawl your website, all they're going to see is an HTML page. And that is also a beauty in Next.js because that's also known as pre-rendering. For example, if we go to the site that we have deployed and let's say we head over to the inspect tag. Now we are going to go ahead and disable JavaScript here. JavaScript is fully disabled. Now if I go to the page source, for example, you should see all these different tags along with content. We are able to see a fairly semantic driven site, for example, and that's because we have used the right tags. We have recognized what the content is. Now before the JavaScript loads, this is exactly what the search engines are going to look at. And that's why it's important that your semantics are right, because they're not going to care for what styling your app has. They're not going to care of what JavaScript it has. But because of this specific step in Next.js, it makes it really exciting because search engines can discover the content on your pages. So this is also known as pre-rendering. Going back, this is what we will be focusing on this specific section. We will be adding all of this inside of our application. So Next.js has a metadata API that we will be using to configure our site for SEO. So this specific metadata API allows you to define your application's metadata. So for example, we can add metadata, which is the description, title, different Open Graph images, and so on. Now, if you're not familiar with Open Graph, then definitely take a look at the Open Graph protocol, which allows you to define the different tags that search engine uses to recognize what's on the site. So for example, this is the OG title, type, URL, image, and so on. Go ahead and configure our site's metadata. If we head over to the layout page, you can see that there is this object that's already been exposed, which is called the metadata. It's already been exported as metadata. Now, this is the metadata API that I was talking about. Again, it's basically used to describe all the metadata fields that can be set in a document, and you can read more on all of those in the Next.js documentation. But for now, let's just go ahead and say it's going to be a easy sell website. And this one, let's go ahead and define what the website is as well. Let's just paste this thing, and this is going to be the description for our website. So if we go ahead and now take a look at our app, you should, and if you refresh the page just in case, you should see there's a title now, easy sell. But at the same time, the metadata description also has what we added in the app. Now, what we also need is some sort of an OG image as well as a canonical URL. Now, if we head over to the Next.js documentation, then we should see the different ways in the API reference section for how we could configure all of this as well. Now, what we are doing is we're focusing on adding static metadata. That means we don't have anything dynamic. We are manually entering everything. But we also may need to generate something dynamic for things like the orange mushroom lamp or all the products as well. We'll get to that in a second. Let's go ahead and configure our site's Open Graph image. So if you look for Open Graph here, you should be able to see how we can configure a image. So let's copy this, and here let's paste Open Graph. graph. Now, this image needs to be an image that we can share. For example, this image needs to be an image that when this website is shared can be shown. We just need an open graph image for this one, and now I already have it ready for us, for example. So this is the image for our open graph. So anyone shares our website, this is exactly what they will see. So now if we go to our public folder where we would be storing all our assets, we could create a folder called as assets and then move this open graph image there. Now we can just say assets/og image.png. Again, if we head over to our website and refresh the page, then in the head element we should be able to see the open graph image which is right here. Now again, we want to make sure that this specific URL will be changing when we deploy it wherever, but since it already takes in the domain, we should be good. But let's call this get canonical URL. Now what this is going to do is if process.end.node is production, or I guess if it's not production, then we want it to be the host we are on. So we can just say http localhost 3001, or it's going to be, this is going to be the URL. Now let's not add any slashes towards the end because that's something that should be taken care of. And now if we head over to our layout, what we could do is convert this into a backtick so that we can add the function that we created. You can say get canonical URL and then add it right here. So this is how you can add the open graph image as well. Lastly, we also need to add a canonical URL too. And the way we can add canonical is by adding a attribute, a property called as alternates, and this is how you can define the canonical URL like it says here. So we can say canonical again is going to be canonical URL that we just defined. So again, it's going to be this on localhost or this other one when we deploy it. But we also need to add it specifically for the slug page as well. We need to configure it in such a way that we are able to generate it dynamically. And that is where the dynamic metadata comes in play. In dynamic metadata, we would be able to generate data dynamically and basically dynamically generate the title, open graph images, and so on. What we could do is inside here, let's dynamically generate the metadata. So what we can do is just copy this code and paste it in here. Now we need to implement that from Next, and we don't necessarily need search params right now. We already have props, which we have defined here. And again, we also need to get metadata from Next.js. Now instead of ID, it's going to be slug because that's the ID we have, and we need to fetch the data accordingly. Now we already have some code for that because we are already fetching it. So let's just copy this code entirely and also just paste it in here. Now what we want to say here is we are going to enter title as empty and description as empty if there are no products, for example. What we need to do is essentially match the specific product ID. And for that, we need to copy this code instead and then paste it in here because we are going to get the single product. So let's just say product over here. So if there is no product, then it will return an empty title and description, and we will also comment this out as well. We don't have any previous images. And now what we are going to do is also add description, and that's going to be product.description. And instead of title, this is going to be name, and in images, instead of this value, it's going to be the image value itself. So what we could do is create a function called as get image URL, because as you can remember, we also have this in several different places. So what we can do is we can just call this function get image URL and pass in data.image URL accordingly. Now if you head over to our utils file and create a new function here called get image URL, then we can use it wherever we want. So we can say return get image URL, and let's just add backtick here. Now instead of data.image URL, that should be the job of the file calling the function. So we can just pass an image URL, which is going to be a string. Now let's just import this. Now whenever we want to add any sort of image, we can just use this. So again, let's just paste this, and here instead of data, it should be product.image URL. So now we have been able to generate title, description, and open graph, and all we need to do now is generate the canonical URL. And in this case, the canonical URL is going to be get canonical URL function that we have defined, and then slash the name of the product, for example. So we go to slash products, and then we also add in the slug as well. So we can say ID is going to be the slug. Now again, we can just use ID here because we have defined it right here. All right, so now we have a lot going on here. Let's go ahead and test out and make sure everything works as expected. Now, if we go to our Easy Cell website, and now let's just go to a mushroom lamp, which is our favorite one so far. Look at that. We do have the title as mushroom lamp. We do have the description as well, and OG description, OG title, and also an OG image. So if I copy this and paste it, it is the right image as well. Then in terms of canonical URL, also have the canonical URL accordingly, because it's exactly this URL on localhost, but it changes when it comes to deploying on production, which is going to be our domain. So this is how you basically create a metadata for specifically individual pages. Now, let's say we want to create a metadata for the upload page as well. So what we could do is we could basically copy this whole thing, but in order for us to add metadata inside of the upload page, we cannot just export it. We need to add it inside layout. So for that, let's just create a layout file. And here we can export the metadata, for example. But what we also need to do is basically get it as children and expose it. For example, let's copy this. And if we head here, we need this. This is going to be the layout file. And we need to expose the children over here as well. And we don't need to add it around any div. We can just return the children. Import all the necessary imports here, for example. And metadata can be from Next. Now, in terms of upload, we can just say easy cell upload. And in terms of description, we can just say upload your files easily, or I should say upload your products easily using easy cell. The image could be the same image, and the alternates could be the canonical URL, and it should be get canonical URL / products / upload, because this is the URL that we have. Alrighty, so now if we go to upload as well, it should have a title, a description, a image, and so on. But if we get rid of this image altogether, it still does have the image, because layout does have the image. So this is one way of overriding the metadata by passing in its own layout inside of upload. When they search something and if our products show up, then users should be able to tell, as well as search engines, what's exactly on the site. So this is how you configure metadata and all the OG tags in Next.js. Next.js will automatically optimize your form. So they do have a Next font package which includes built-in automatic self-hosting. This means you can automatically load your web fonts without any layout shift that we talked about earlier. And the good news is that you can automatically self-host any Google fonts you like. Now, in our case, we are using two different fonts, one for the header, easy cell, and the other for the rest of the code. So let's go ahead and configure that. What we need to do is go to layout, and let's close this one. But you can see that there is a font Inter by default. It's a great font, but if you want to change it, we can easily do that too. So we will be using two fonts here, Nanito and Josephine Sans. Now, Nanito is going to be this specific font, and Josephine is going to be this font. Add something like cute font here, and this could be the Nanito default font. By default, the entire application is going to get the Nanito font. So you're going to say Nanito default font.class name. And then if you remember, header did have a font property that we made optional. And now pass in font equals cute font.class name. Similarly, we're going to do the same right here. And again, make this not optional. So now if we go back to our app and refresh the page, now if we head over to inspect, and if we just hover over this one, you can see the Nanito font has been applied. Now, similarly, if you hover over this one, then you can see that the font is in fact Josephine. So this is how you can tell that your fonts have been applied correctly. But in terms of fonts themselves, there are other things as well that you could do. You could also host your local font using a local font import from Next.js. Again, you can do next font local and then pass in the font and store that easily inside your public folder, and all your assets are going to be stored. But you can play around with so many different fonts that you want to show on the page and make your app look really good. Lastly, let's just go ahead and clean up our application. So here, if you see, let's just remove unnecessary comments. And there's one more tweak we need to do, which is that we need to make sure that we're using this function everywhere we are using the domain. So if we take a look at the page itself, you can get rid of all of this. And at At the bottom over here, we can just pass in product.image URL here. Similarly, we could do the same at the bottom as well so that we are using the same function everywhere. We can remove any unused imports. We're just making sure that we are cleaning up our application as we are getting ready to deploy it. Don't need to console log it unnecessarily. So lastly, if you review our application, except the form where we definitely need to make sure that we have on-change handlers and form works as expected, is when we are using a client component. But rest everything in our app is a server component. So this just goes to show how a majority of your app can be a server component and can survive without having the client functionality. And this makes the application burn. It makes the performance of our application really fast. There's this one message that we keep getting saying that Metadata database is not set for resolving social, Open Graph, or Twitter images. So if I go to this specific URL, then we do need to set this specific URL, and then the alternates could be the remaining path, which makes our life really easy. So what we could do is go to layout, application is set up, and here we can just set the URL, and again we can still use the same function that we set up, but we now no longer need to add this to every URL we want, and this could just be slash, for example. Similarly, if we go to the individual pages, don't need to add canonical URL because that will automatically be included. Over here as well, we don't need this because it will automatically include it because layout will have the metadata base itself. The second thing we need to work on is the layout fill. Layout fill was available to us in a previous Next.js version, but now the equivalent is using fill equals true, which works the same way. So if we go to localhost 3000 and run our application, the errors that we were seeing earlier are all gone because we have resolved it. So that is why it's really important for us to learn how to run the production build and see what errors might come up before going and deploying anything. Thank you so much for checking out this specific crash course. If you did, please subscribe to my channel and comment below and let me know what other crash course that I should create. Now, as next steps, check out this specific video on how you can add transitions to your app using Framer Motion and a very special file inside of Next.js. Or check out this other playlist where you will learn all about Next.js in depth. So I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.